There is a particular kind of love that only a dog gives. You know it if you've had one. It's a love that waits at the door, a love that forgives instantly, a love that stays close when you're sick, that senses your sadness before you've said a word, that greets you like you're the most important person in the universe, every single time, even after a lifetime together. A dog's love is loyal past all reason and given without conditions, without keeping score, without ever asking what it will get in return. It is, in many ways, the purest love most of us will ever experience in this life. And when that love is taken from you, when the door goes unwatched and the house goes quiet, the silence it leaves behind is almost unbearable. Anyone who tells you it's just a dog has never been loved by one. But here is something almost nobody stops to consider. That loyal, faithful, unconditional love your dog gave you, where did it come from? What is it, really? And what does the God who made your dog have to say about a love like that, and about where it goes when the dog who carried it is gone? What if the answer to where that love goes is hidden inside the love itself? Today I want to explore the biblical truth about dogs and heaven, not as a cold theological debate, not as a dry argument about doctrine, but as something far more tender and far closer to the ache in your chest. And I'll warn you now, some of this may bring tears, but I hope they'll be the kind that heal. Stay with me all the way to the end, because the last part speaks directly to the faithful friend you're missing tonight. Let me tell you about a man named James, because he's the reason I made this video. James lost a dog named Shep, a border collie who had worked alongside him on a farm for 14 years. And James was not a man who cried easily. He told me that himself. He'd grown up hard, worked hard, kept his feelings to himself. But when Shep died, James said something broke open in him that he couldn't control. Because Shep, he said, had loved him with a loyalty he wasn't sure he'd ever deserved. Through every hard season, every failure, every long and lonely winter on that farm, Shep had simply been there, faithful, steady, never once turning away, never once holding a grudge, never once loving James any less on his worst days than on his best. James said that, in his whole life, he wasn't sure any person had loved him quite so completely, or so simply, as that dog had. And James wrote to me and said, I keep asking myself, was that love just biology? Just a dog being a dog? Or was there something more to it, something real, that couldn't just end? Because if a love like that just stops and disappears, then I don't understand anything about the world. And I was able to write back and tell him, James, you've stumbled onto one of the deepest truths in all of Scripture. Let me show you. Here is the biblical truth, and it begins with understanding what your dog's love actually was. The Bible tells us in the first letter of John, chapter 4, something simple and staggering. God is love. Love itself, all love, everywhere it is found, originates in God. It is His very nature. And a few verses later, John writes, everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Now, whenever you encounter real love in this world, genuine, faithful, self-giving love, you are encountering something that comes from God, that reflects God, that has its source in God. And here is the tender truth, the loyal, faithful, unconditional love your dog gave you was a real love. Anyone who has been loved by a good dog knows it was real. That means it was not merely biology, not merely instinct. It was a reflection in a creature of the very love that God Himself is. Your dog's faithfulness was a small, living echo of the faithfulness of God Himself. Sit with that for a moment, because it changes everything. The love you received from your dog was not a lesser thing, not a mere animal function, not a trick of instinct and biology. It was a genuine reflection, poured into a humble creature of the deepest reality in the universe, that God is love, and that love is faithful, and steadfast, and true. Your dog was, in its own wordless way, showing you something about the very heart of God. Think about the words we use for a good dog: faithful, loyal, devoted, true. These are the very same words the Bible uses to describe God's own love for us. In the book of Lamentations, God's love is called faithful, new every morning, never failing. Does that remind you of anything? The love that greeted you new every morning, that never failed, that stayed faithful to the very end? Your dog carried, in its own simple and beautiful way, a spark of the very quality that Scripture treasures most in God Himself: faithful love, steadfast love. Hesed, the old Hebrew word for it, God's loyal, covenant-keeping, never-abandoning love. That is the love the Bible celebrates above all others, and it is precisely the love a good dog pours out on the one it has chosen. Love that does not quit, love that stays, love that is there in the morning, and there at night, and there at the end. When you were loved by a faithful dog, you were being shown, in miniature, the shape of the love of God. When James read this, he wrote back and said it undid him, because he'd been trying to convince himself that Shep's loyalty was just a dog being a dog, nothing more. And now he saw it differently. That faithfulness, that steadfast, never-failing love, was a reflection of God's own heart, living in his dog. He said, so Shep's love wasn't nothing. It was a piece of God's own kind of love right there beside me for 14 years. And that thought broke him open all over again, right there at his kitchen table, a grown man weeping over a border collie. But this time, he said, it was a different kind of breaking, not the crushing kind, the healing kind. The kind that comes when something you feared was meaningless turns out to have been sacred all along. I want to pause here because I suspect this is reaching someone who was loved, truly loved, by a faithful dog and who has been aching in the silence that love left behind. If you've been missing that loyal, steadfast presence, that love that never failed you, I want you to know it was real, and it mattered, and it came from God. There's a whole community of us here who have been loved like that and who understand the size of that loss. Thousands of people who love God and love the animals He made. If your heart has needed this, subscribe and walk with us. You don't have to grieve that faithful love alone. And very quickly, for those who want to go deeper than a single video can reach, everything we explore here, all these verses and this hope I've gathered into a complete book of comfort called Eden's Promise. It's linked right below this video if you'd ever like it. That's all. Now let's go to the deepest part of this truth, because it's the part that speaks to where that love goes. Because here is the question underneath James's grief, and maybe yours. If your dog's love was a real reflection of God's own faithful love, then what happens to it when the dog dies? Does God let a love that came from Him simply blink out into nothing? Let me be honest with you first, the way I always am here, because honesty is everything on this channel. The Bible does not contain a verse that says, in plain words, your dog is in heaven. I won't pretend it does. There is real mystery here, and an honest faith rests in it without stretching Scripture past what it says. But now let me show you what Scripture does give us, because it is far from nothing. We've seen that the world to come, in Isaiah, is full of living animals at peace. We've seen that God, in Revelation, promises to wipe away every tear and make everything new. And we've seen that the faithful love your dog gave you was a reflection of God's own steadfast love. Now put those together. The God who is love, who treasures faithful love above all, who fills His restored world with animals, and who promises to make all things new, looked down and saw the faithful, loyal love your dog carried, a love that reflected His very own. Is that a God who would simply discard such a creature? Would the God who is faithful love throw away, discard, annihilate a creature that so beautifully and completely reflected His own faithfulness? Would He look at 14 years of steadfast, loyal, never-failing devotion that mirrored His very nature, and simply let it vanish as if it had never mattered? Everything Scripture tells us about the heart of God says no. Emphatically, tenderly, no. The God who treasures faithful love does not despise the faithful creature who carried it. And there's one more thread, and it's beautiful. Jesus calls Himself the Good Shepherd, the one who knows His own, who does not lose what belongs to Him, who lays down His life for His flock. A shepherd and his dog understand each other. Both give themselves in faithful care for the ones entrusted to them. When Jesus describes His own heart as a shepherd's heart, faithful, protective, refusing to lose even one, He is describing exactly the kind of loyal love your dog showed you. That love is not foreign to God. It is at the very center of who He is. And a love at the center of God's own heart is not the kind of thing He lets fall carelessly into nothing. The Good Shepherd, Jesus said, does not lose what belongs to Him. He goes after the one. He carries it home. That is the heart of God toward faithful, loyal love and toward the faithful creatures who carry it. When James understood all of this, he wrote to me one final time, and this hard, private man told me he wasn't ashamed of the tears anymore, because he no longer believed Shep's love had simply ended. He'd come to believe that the faithfulness he'd seen in his dog for 14 years was a reflection of God's own faithful love, and that a God who is faithful love would not be unfaithful to the creature who carried it. He pictured Shep in the world God has promised, in a restored creation full of animals at peace, faithful still, waiting still in a place where nothing loyal is ever lost. He said, "If God is love, and Shep's love was real, and I know in my bones that it was, then I don't believe God just let it disappear into nothing. I think faithfulness like that goes home to the God it came from. I think it's safe with Him. And I think one day I'll see my dog again." He told me he'd never expected to believe something like that, a hard, practical man like him. But the more he looked at what Scripture actually said, the more he found he couldn't believe anything else. That, he said, was the first peace he'd felt since Shep died. So let me bring it home for you. The biblical truth about dogs and heaven is not a cold argument. It's this: the faithful, loyal, unconditional love your dog gave you was real. And every real love comes from God, who is love itself. Your dog's steadfast faithfulness was a living reflection of God's own steadfast love, the very quality Scripture treasures most in Him. And the God who is faithful love, who fills His restored world with animals, and who promises to make all things new, is not a God who discards the faithful creature that so beautifully echoed His own heart. There is no single verse that proves it, but the whole shape of who God is leans with all its weight toward hope. So the next time you remember the way your dog loved you, that loyalty that waited at the door, that never failed, that stayed faithful to the very end, don't believe that love simply vanished. It was a reflection of the faithful love of God. And the God whose very nature is faithful love does not, in the end, abandon the faithful. Your dog's love was real. It came from God. And there is every honest biblical reason to hope that a love so faithful was not lost, but has gone home to the God who is faithful love and who is making all things new. If this brought peace to your heart today, and if it brought tears, I hope they were the kind that heal. I'm so grateful you stayed with me all the way to the end. This is what we do here. At Eden's Promise, we hold the Scriptures together, honestly, and we find the hope they offer those of us who love the animals God gave us. And thank you to James and to everyone who writes to me and shares their story. His question about where Shep's faithful love had gone is the reason this video exists. If there's something you'd like me to explore next, a verse, a question, an animal you loved, leave it in the comments below. I read every single one, and if you've found a home here in this gentle community, stay with us, subscribe, and walk with us in faith, in hope, and in love for the animals God gave us. Until next time, may you find peace, and may the promise of Eden be a comfort to your heart.